My name's Mason Keller, and if you'd asked me 3 years ago, I would have told you I had life pretty much under control. It wasn't glamorous by any stretch, but it worked. I had a stable gig as a network technician, one of those jobs nobody really talks about unless something breaks. I spent most of my days behind a desk in a cramped office, troubleshooting systems, running updates, nothing exciting, but it covered the rent and kept food on the table. The real light in my life back then was my wife, Elise. She had this presence about her, smart, gorgeous, sharp as they come. The kind of woman who didn't just walk into a room, she owned it. And every time people noticed her, which they always did, I'd feel this quiet pride settle in my chest because somehow she'd chosen me. Her folks, Barbara and Dennis, lived just a couple towns over. They were always dropping by unannounced, like our front door was more of a suggestion than a boundary. At first, I didn't mind. That's what family does, right? They show up. They stay involved. I thought it was harmless. And then there was my younger brother, Ryan. Growing up, he was the golden boy, the kid everyone thought was headed for something big. Smart, athletic, one of those people who just made life look easy. But somewhere along the line, it all unraveled for him. He flunked out of college, bounced from one dead-end job to another, and eventually ended up crashing on our couch. I let him stay, figured that's what brothers are for. Help him get back on track, give him a soft place to land for a while. That's what I believed back then, that family looked out for each other, no matter what. But looking back now? I see how blind I really was. I didn't catch the small things, the way Elise would trade these subtle glances with her parents when they thought I wasn't paying attention. Or how Ryan would hang around her just a little too long, like he didn't know when to leave the room. Funny how clear it all looks in hindsight. That night, when he told me goodnight, I brushed it off. Told myself I was just overthinking, letting my head play tricks on me after a long day. Why would I even question it? These were my people. The ones I was supposed to trust the most, my wife, her parents, my own little brother. The very people I thought would always have my back. Turns out, I was the idiot sitting right in the middle of it all, feeding the very ones who were smiling to my face and stabbing me in the back. Every day I'd come home worn out from work, not miserable, just tired, thinking I was doing what any good man should. Building a life. Taking care of my own. I'd pull together dinner some nights, nothing fancy, just enough to get us through the evening. I'd sit with Elise on the couch while some show played in the background, laugh along with Barbara's ridiculous stories about her church friends or whatever drama she picked up that week. And when Ryan would mention he was strapped for cash, I'd slide him a little money without a second thought. That's what family does, right? At least, that's what I believed. But looking back, man, there was something festering beneath it all, and I was too caught up in my routine to see it. There's one night I'll never forget, maybe a month before everything came crashing down. We were all crammed around that old wooden table in the kitchen. Me, Elise, her parents, Barbara and Dennis, and Ryan. I'd thrown together some spaghetti, nothing special, just enough to keep everyone's stomach from growling. Most of the night was easy, Barbara going on about how their neighbor across the street just bought some shiny new car. I remember cracking a joke about how my rusty old Corolla would probably outlive us all, had the whole table laughing for a second. But then Ryan muttered something under his breath, too quiet for me to catch, and I swear I caught Elise smirk. Real fast, barely there, but I saw it. It hit me like a stone in my gut. I asked him what he'd said, and he just shrugged like it was nothing, stuffing another forkful of pasta in his mouth like he didn't have a care in the world. Funny how moments like that stay with you. At the time, I let it go, figured I was just tired, reading into things too much. But now? I know better. Nothing, man, just messing around, he mumbled, barely loud enough for me to catch. And right then, Elise reached over and squeezed my hand under the table. Her palm was warm against mine, steady, like she was pulling me back from whatever suspicion was trying to crawl up in my head. So I let it slide. I told myself not to be that guy, not the husband who reads too much into every little thing. I wanted to believe in them. I needed to believe in them. So I forced a smile, took another bite of spaghetti, and tried to swallow that small, uncomfortable knot twisting in my stomach. But that knot? It wasn't going anywhere. Not really. It sat there quietly for a while, but eventually, it would tighten, pull, and turn until it was all I could feel. But that night? I buried it. Shoved it down like it didn't matter. Told myself I was being ridiculous. These were my people. My wife. Her parents. My little brother. What in the world could they possibly be hiding from me? The truth is, I didn't want to know. I didn't want to see it. My entire life was wrapped around them, every piece of me built around us. Elise and I had been married 5 years by then. We'd had our share of arguments, what couple doesn't? But I always believed we were solid. I really did. Her folks, Barbara and Dennis, They treated me like I was one of their own. And Ryan? That was my kid brother. I raised him more than anyone else ever did. He looked up to me, or at least I thought he did. I didn't have much of a social life outside of them. Work kept me busy, long hours, tight deadlines, and truth be told, I was never great at making friends. So they were it for me. My world. My family. Most nights, after the house had gone quiet, everyone tucked in or lost in their phones, I'd just sit there, lying on my back, staring at the ceiling of our small rental in Oakfield, feeling nothing but thankful. Thankful for a wife who still kissed me goodnight, for in-laws who asked if I'd eaten, for a brother who still came to me when he was broke or in trouble. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't glamorous. But it was mine. Or at least, I thought it was. Looking back now? I see it clear as day. The cracks were always there. The late nights Elise spent glued to her phone, screen turned just enough so I couldn't see. The way Barbara's smile never fully reached her eyes when she talked to me. The signs were right there in front of me. I just didn't want to believe them. Man. The way Micah talked back then, it started feeling empty, fake almost. Like his words had no weight behind them anymore. I didn't realize it at the time, I was too blind, too trusting, but I was living right in the middle of a nest of snakes. And they were already tightening around me, just waiting for the right moment to sink their teeth in. It's crazy how easy it is to lie to yourself when you want things to be good. I kept telling myself I was lucky, that I had it better than most guys. Good wife. Good friends. A home filled with laughter. What more could I ask for? So I ignored the little things. The late-night whispers coming from the guest room down the hall. The way Jordan would suddenly switch topics when I'd walk into a conversation, like clockwork. And I shrugged off the fact that Micah never seemed in a rush to leave, even though he'd been crashing at our place for months. Months. I let it slide because I wanted to believe in them. I needed to. But that was 3 years ago, before everything fell apart. Before the trip. Before that stupid little chapel on the beach. Before the red spray paint and the voice recordings that would turn my world upside down. Back then? I was just Darren Keller. Just a regular guy who thought he had it all figured out. Thought I was building a quiet, steady life with people who loved me. I didn't have a clue I was standing on the edge of a drop I wouldn't come back from, and the worst part? The people waiting to shove me over, they were the very people I trusted most. I still remember the night Elise first floated the idea of that family trip to Maui. It was a Tuesday, late afternoon. I had just walked in from work, exhausted. Tie half undone, laptop bag already dropped onto the recliner like I did every day. She was in the kitchen, I can still see it like a photograph, standing by the counter, hair thrown up in that messy bun she always wore when she cooked. She looked up at me, those bright green eyes catching the last bit of sunlight spilling through the window, and with this sweet, almost innocent voice, she said, "Darren, what if we all went to Maui? The whole family." If only I knew then what that trip was really about. She said it real soft, like she'd been holding it in all day. You know, me, you, Mom, Dad, Micah, just get away for a while. I still remember how her voice sounded, almost fragile, like she needed me to say yes more than she wanted it. I was leaning up against the kitchen island, arms crossed, just watching her work. She had this effortless way of chopping vegetables, fast, clean, like muscle memory. She didn't even look up when she added, "We need this." Then, like it was nothing, she brushed her hand across mine while reaching for the salt. Barely a second, but long enough for me to feel that old warmth between us. And for a split second, I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe a trip somewhere sunny, a break from all the noise, beaches, good food, maybe a cold drink in my hand, could make everything better. Not that I'd said anything out loud, but things had been off around the house for a while. There was this heaviness hanging over everything, like something pressing on my chest that I couldn't shake. I told myself it was just stress from work. Long hours. Bad sleep. Or maybe it was Micah still crashing on our couch like he lived there, months after he was supposed to be gone. Whatever it was, the way Elise looked at me right then, hopeful, soft-eyed, made me think maybe she was right. Maybe we did need to get away before we both drowned in whatever this was. But I wasn't sold right away. Money wasn't exactly pouring in. We weren't broke, not by a long shot, but we weren't rolling in extra cash either. My job as a systems analyst paid the bills just fine, but Hawaii? That's not exactly a weekend road trip. Flights, hotel, food, all of it stacks up quick. I scratched the back of my neck, kinda stalling, and said, "Elise, flights, hotel, food, that stuff adds up." And like clockwork, she hit me with that smile. The one I always fell for. Bright, easy, like she already knew she had me. "Don't worry," she said, "we'll figure it out. It'll be worth it." Looking back, I should have asked more questions. Like how exactly were we gonna figure it out? And why did she want this trip so bad all of a sudden? But I didn't. And that was my first mistake. But I didn't speak up. I should have, believe me, I know that now, but I just let it slide. The next day, Gavin and Lorraine came by, they usually did on Sundays, and the minute Amber told them about the trip, they lit up like kids hearing about a surprise party. "Oh, Mason, that sounds wonderful." Lorraine clapped her hands together, all her bangles jingling like wind chimes. Gavin gave one of those slow nods while puffing on that old cigar of his, mumbling, "'Bout time we all did something together." And I just stood there. I didn't even bother correcting them. It wasn't my idea, it was Amber's. But what was the point? They were so happy about it. The last thing I wanted was to be the guy who crushed the mood. Then there was Micah. He was slouched back in the armchair like always, glued to his phone, barely looking up when Amber mentioned the trip. Just tossed out a lazy, cool, like we'd told him what was for dinner. Honestly, I figured he wouldn't even come. Why would he? The guy hadn't paid me a dime in months, still living rent-free in my house, and I'd pretty much been feeding him half the time. But then Amber turned to him and said, "Don't worry, we've got your ticket covered." And right then, my stomach twisted a little. We? I remember thinking. Since when is there a we paying for Micah? Spoiler, it was mostly me. I ended up paying for almost everything, flights for 5 people, a week at some fancy beachfront rental on the coast, even a rental car. Every time I clicked confirm payment on those bookings, I could feel my savings account bleeding out. Amber chipped in a little from her side gig, she did some freelance design work here and there, but it barely scratched the surface. Gavin and Lorraine? They offered to cover one dinner. One. And Micah? The guy just shrugged at me and said, "Thanks, man," like I'd spotted him a drink instead of dropping $1,000 on his plane ticket. And the worst part? I could have said no. I should have said no. I could have drawn the line, told them flat out we couldn't afford this, told Micah he needed to handle his own business. But I didn't. I let it happen. And I'd be lying if I said I didn't regret it. I just wanted to see Amber happy, that was all I kept telling myself. She kept saying this trip was what we needed, that it'd bring everybody back together. And I bought into that. I wanted to believe it. I kept thinking maybe getting away, someplace quiet, someplace beautiful, could smooth over all the little cracks that had started creeping into our life. Cracks I hadn't really wanted to face head-on yet. Work was steady enough, kept the bills paid, but it was draining me. And things with Amber? I don't know. Some days it felt like she was right there next to me, and other days it felt like she was 100 miles away, like I was reaching for someone already halfway out the door. Having Micah around all the time didn't exactly help either. The guy treated my house like a college dorm. His junk was everywhere, socks on the living room floor, empty cups stacking up by the sink. And her parents, Gavin and Lorraine, they were over so often they might as well have had their mail delivered there. Walking around like it was their place. I figured maybe a change of scenery would reset things. Maybe we could hit pause on all the noise, laugh again like we used to. I wanted to believe that so badly. The night before we left, I was in our room packing my suitcase, folding clothes the way I always did, neat piles of shirts and shorts, while Amber was zipping around the place double-checking her makeup bag like we were late for something. "You excited?" she asked me, catching my eyes in the mirror. "Yeah," I told her, forcing a smile I wasn't sure I really felt. "It's gonna be great." And I wanted it to be true. I really did. I kept picturing us all on that beach, me and Amber walking hand in hand down by the water, Gavin and Lorraine sitting back with drinks in their hands, Micah maybe even smiling for once instead of scowling at his phone. I imagined me and Amber staying up late, sitting under the stars, talking like we used to back before life got so heavy. Truth was, we hadn't done that in a long time. I'd been drowning in work. And she, well, she'd been on her phone late at night, messaging somebody, said it was just a client. I didn't press her about it. I trusted her. She was my wife. The woman I promised forever to, and Micah, my own brother. I'd always had his back, even when he made it impossible for everyone else. Our folks could be a lot sometimes, overprotective, opinionated, but I always told myself their heart was in the right place. That's what I was thinking as I zipped up my duffel bag that morning, trying to shake off that heavy feeling sitting in my chest like a rock. When we pulled up to the airport, everybody was in a good mood. Savannah couldn't stop taking pictures of the check-in signs like we were headed off on some once-in-a-lifetime adventure. "This is gonna be a trip to remember," she kept saying, grinning behind her phone. My dad, Henry, slapped me on the back, harder than he needed to, and said, "Way to go, Evan. Proud of you for pulling this off." Micah barely looked up, earbuds in, hoodie up, lost in whatever world he lived in where nothing really seemed to matter. Amber slipped her hand around my arm and leaned in close. "Really, thank you for this," she said, her voice soft enough that it actually cut through all the noise around me. For a second, I felt myself relax, like maybe I was just in my head too much. Maybe I was the problem. Maybe this trip really was what we needed. On the plane, I sat next to her, watching the clouds drift by like slow-moving waves beneath us. She rested her head on my shoulder, and I caught that familiar scent of coconut from her shampoo, the same one she'd always used. It felt right. Normal. Like maybe we still had a chance to get back to who we used to be. And I let myself believe it. I let myself picture this week in Maui fixing what had quietly been breaking between us for months. I didn't know then, not even a hint, that I was walking straight into something I never saw coming. A setup. A betrayal from the very people I thought I could count on most. All I knew, all I could tell myself, was that I'd poured everything I had into this. My money. My time. My heart. My trust. I gave them this trip because I wanted us to heal. And I was praying like hell it'd be enough. The second I stepped off that plane and felt that warm coastal breeze hit my face, all I could really feel was a mix of relief and just bone-deep exhaustion. That flight felt like it went on forever. Most of it, I wasn't even sitting still, I was up and down the aisle, making sure everybody was good. I grabbed an extra pillow for my mom, Laurel, because she can't sleep on planes without one. I pulled my dad, Rick's, bag down from the overhead so he didn't have to wrestle with it. And I just sat there nodding along while Brooke, my wife, talked nonstop about how amazing the resort was supposed to be. And for a second, standing there in that little open-air terminal, with the scent of tropical flowers hanging in the air, I let myself think, maybe this would actually work. Maybe this trip could fix things. We all crammed into the rental, a big black SUV I shelled out extra for, and I drove us toward the resort. It really was beautiful. The sand looked like it stretched forever, soft and white, with the waves rolling in calm and steady. The palm trees swayed like they'd been waiting for us to show up. I handled check-in, passed out the room keys, hauled all the bags upstairs, mine included, of course. That's just how I am. When Brooke and I stepped into our room, huge windows, balcony looking straight out over the ocean, she smiled at me and said, "This is perfect, Evan." And God, I wanted to believe her. I really did. I wanted to think this was the reset we needed, to get away from the weird distance that had been growing between us back home. But it didn't take long before that gut feeling I'd been trying to ignore came creeping right back in. It started small. Little things. Brooke felt off. Detached, like her head was somewhere else entirely. She'd sit by the pool in those oversized sunglasses of hers, staring out at the water without saying much to me at all. I'd ask her if she wanted to go for a swim or grab a drink, and she'd just kind of nod or mumble, maybe later, like it didn't really matter. I told myself she was just tired, jet lag, maybe. She'd settle in once she relaxed. But then there was Micah. He was everywhere she went. Like some damn shadow that wouldn't leave her side. If Brooke got up to grab a towel, there he was right behind her. If she sat down to read by the pool, he'd plop down right next to her, cracking jokes I couldn't catch from where I was sitting. I'd watch them from my lounge chair, squinting against the afternoon sun, trying to convince myself I was overthinking it. They'd always been close. Micah was the easygoing one. The funny one. And Brooke always liked that about him, the way he could light up a room without trying. But this? This didn't feel like the same old thing. It was too much. Too constant. Too intimate. I kept catching him leaning in toward her, whispering something that would have her laughing like she didn't have a care in the world. And it hit me hard because she hadn't laughed like that with me in what felt like forever. My gut would tighten up every time I saw it, but I'd shove it down. I mean, that's my brother. And she's supposed to be my wife. Maybe I was being paranoid. Maybe I was imagining things. But then there were her parents, Laurel and Rick, acting strange in their own way. I'd see them clustered around Brooke, heads bent in close, talking low like they didn't want anyone else hearing. Once, I came walking up to them near the outdoor bar, just trying to join in, and the second they noticed me, they cut the conversation off like someone hit a switch. All three of them just turned to look at me, their faces blank like I wasn't supposed to be there. "What's going on?" I asked, forcing out this fake little laugh to keep it light. Laurel waved her hand and gave me that brittle smile. "Oh, just talking about what to do tomorrow." But her eyes didn't match her mouth. Brooke wouldn't even look at me. Rick just took a long sip of his beer without saying a word. And it kept happening, the next morning at breakfast, again by the pool, hushed voices, quick glances, words that died the second I got too close. I swear. I started feeling like a stranger in my own vacation. Like I was watching something I was never supposed to see. It was the trip I'd paid for, out of my own pocket. I'd sit there, picking at my food, and wonder why they were suddenly so distant. Was it something I did? Had I messed up somehow? I didn't plan enough activities? I couldn't quite put my finger on it, but there was this quiet nagging feeling that something wasn't right. It wasn't until dinner that night that it hit me full force. We were at this upscale spot in the resort, one of those places with soft candlelight on every table and waiters in crisp white shirts, the kind that made me feel out of place. I was trying to keep things light, trying to break the weird energy that had been building. I picked up my lei, the flower necklace they'd given us at check-in, and I said, "Hey, what if we all wore these tomorrow? Matching family look, right?" I laughed, expecting some eye rolls or at least a smile, but instead, Marjorie gave this sharp little chuckle and said, "You'd be the last to know, wouldn't you, Grant?" Her words hung in the air, heavy and biting. Then Cliff let out a snort, Callum smirked, and Celeste just stared at her plate, not even looking up. They all laughed, a private, knowing laugh that didn't include me. My face went hot, and my smile dropped. "What's that supposed to mean?" I asked, trying to keep my tone casual, but no one answered. The waiter came by with more bread, and the moment slipped away, but that one line, "last to know," stuck with me. It was like they were all in on some joke, and I was just the punchline. I sat there, pushing my food around, my appetite completely gone. They were chatting about the beach like nothing had happened the night before, and I just couldn't focus. I hadn't slept at all. Celeste told me she needed space, those were her exact words, and then she grabbed her sandals and walked out, heading for a solo stroll. I watched her by the door, her figure outlined by the moonlight coming through the balcony, and she said, "Don't wait up." "Okay." I didn't know what else to say. "I just need to clear my head." Her voice was too calm, too smooth, like she'd practiced it. I nodded, laying back on the bed, staring at the ceiling, the fan spinning above me. "Sure." But my mind wouldn't settle. I kept asking myself, clear her head from what? Me? The trip? Something else? I listened as the door clicked shut, and then it was just me and the steady hum of the air conditioner filling the silence. I tried to convince myself she was just stressed. I tried to relax, but that knot in my stomach came back, tighter than ever. I kept replaying everything, how Callum had stuck so close to her, the whispers with her parents, that laugh at dinner. Her voice from earlier kept echoing in my head, too calm, too rehearsed. I sat up, my heart racing, and glanced out toward the balcony. The beach was empty and dark, except for a few distant figures that didn't make sense. Was she really alone, or was she meeting someone? I didn't want to think it, but I couldn't stop myself. Something was off, really off, and it felt like I was the only one who didn't know what was going on. By the time she came back, it was well past midnight. I kept my eyes closed, pretending to be asleep. My breathing slow and steady, even as she slipped into bed beside me. She didn't touch me, didn't say anything, just settled in, her back turned to mine. I stayed still, half-conscious, watching the shadows play on the wall. I wanted to ask where she'd been, who she'd been with, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. I was terrified of the answer, terrified of what it might mean. That night, something hit me, this wasn't just tiredness or paranoia. Something was happening, something big, and I was on the outside looking in. I couldn't put my finger on it yet, but I knew I couldn't ignore it anymore. The perfect getaway I'd imagined was slipping through my fingers, and I was starting to wonder if it had ever really been mine to begin with. The next morning, I woke up with a weight in my chest that I couldn't shake. Celeste was already up, standing by the mirror in our room, brushing her hair with slow, deliberate strokes. She was wearing a white sundress I hadn't seen before. Simple, but elegant, like she belonged in a photo shoot. "Morning," I mumbled, rubbing my eyes as I propped myself up in bed. She glanced at me through the mirror and gave a small smile. "Morning. I've got an errand to run today." "Okay." I nodded, still trying to wake up. "I won't be long," she added, her voice light and casual, but there was something about it that made my stomach tighten. An errand? In Hawaii? We were supposed to be on vacation. What could she possibly need to do? I wanted to ask, but my throat felt dry, and all I managed was a weak "okay, sure." She gave me a quick nod, grabbed her purse, and slipped out the door before I could say anything else. I sat there in silence, staring at the spot where she'd been, my mind racing, last night's walk, the strange vibes, and now this. Nothing about it made sense. I couldn't just sit there, wondering anymore. I had to know. I waited about 10 minutes, enough time for her to get a head start, before I threw on some shorts and a t-shirt. My hands were shaking. I fumbled as I tied my sneakers, my heart pounding like I was about to run a marathon. I didn't have a plan. Just a gut feeling telling me to follow her. I grabbed my wallet and headed out, locking the door behind me. Downstairs, I waved a cab down by the resort's entrance. The driver, a laid-back guy wearing a faded baseball cap, looked at me as I climbed in. "Follow that white sedan up ahead," I told him, pointing at Celeste's rental car pulling out of the lot. He raised an eyebrow but shrugged and started the engine. "Whatever you say, man." We trailed her from a distance, winding through roads flanked by green hills and palm trees swaying in the breeze. My eyes stayed fixed on her car, my palm sweating against the seat. Where was she going? Why wouldn't she tell me? The cab smelled like old leather and sunscreen, and every bump in the road felt like a jolt straight to my nerves. I kept telling myself I was overthinking it, that she was probably just running some errand, picking up a snack, a gift, something harmless. But deep down, I knew it wasn't that simple. After about 15 minutes, her car slowed and veered down a narrow lane. We followed, the scenery changing to a quieter stretch of coast. Then, I saw it. A small white chapel nestled between cliffs and trees, its steeple rising against the bright blue sky. It looked peaceful, almost like something you'd see on a postcard, but when I watched her park there, something icy ran through me. She got out of the car, her dress catching the sunlight, and walked toward the chapel without so much as a glance back. I ordered the driver to stop a few yards away. "Here," I muttered. He nodded, and I handed him a crumpled 20 before stepping out of the cab. My legs felt like jelly as I crossed the gravel path, keeping low behind the bushes. I didn't know what I was expecting to find, but I couldn't turn back now. My gut had pulled me this far, and it was screaming at me to keep going. I crept toward the chapel's side entrance, staying hidden as much as I could. The ground beneath my sneakers crunched softly, and the air smelled of salt and sweetness, but all I could focus on was the frantic pounding in my chest. When I reached the building, I pressed myself against the wall and peered through a crack in the window. That's when I saw her. Celeste. Standing at the altar, her white dress glowing under the soft light streaming through the stained glass. My breath caught in my throat, and for a second, I thought I'd lost it. She looked like a bride. My wife, my Celeste, standing there, looking like it was our wedding day all over again. But then I saw him, Callum, my brother. He was standing next to her in a white suit, his hair slicked back, wearing a grin that felt like a punch in the gut. They were holding hands, facing each other, and it hit me like a ton of bricks. I couldn't move, couldn't blink. I just stood there, frozen, as everything around me seemed to shift. The minister was between them, this small figure in black, his hands raised as though he was about to speak. Marjorie and Cliff were sitting in the front pew, smiling, big, proud smiles, like they were in on some joke. My knees went weak, and I grabbed onto the window frame, trying to steady myself. This couldn't be happening. It had to be a mistake, some weird dream, anything but the reality in front of me. I stood there, paralyzed, my mind spinning, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Was this some sort of surprise vow renewal? A surprise for us? But no, that didn't make sense. She had said she was running an errand, not setting up something like this. And why the hell was Callum up there, dressed like that, holding her hand? My chest tightened, and I felt this sick, gnawing feeling, the kind that comes when you know something awful is true but can't bring yourself to admit it. I edged closer to the side door and pushed it open, just wide enough to slip inside. I stayed in the shadows, hidden behind a wooden screen, close enough to see but far enough to stay out of sight. The air inside felt heavy, thick with the scent of flowers and old wood. Celeste stood with her back to me, her shoulders rigid, her voice too soft to make out. And Callum, he leaned in close, his face gentle, almost tender, and it hit me like a punch to the stomach. I wanted to scream, to rush up there and demand answers, but I couldn't. I stood frozen, watching my whole world crumble in a tiny chapel I didn't even know existed. That's when it hit me, I'd been blind. All the little things I'd ignored, the whispers, the growing distance between us, the way they'd laughed at me the night before. It all made sense now. This wasn't some spontaneous act. They'd planned it, kept it from me, brought me all the way to Hawaii just to pull this off right under my nose. My wife, Celeste, was standing at an altar with my brother, and her parents were sitting there, smiling like it was the happiest day of their lives. My hands clenched into fists, my nails digging into my palms, but I didn't let myself cry. I didn't shout. I just backed out slowly, as quietly as I could, my mind buzzing with a cold, sharp clarity. I'd seen it now. There was no going back. As I stumbled out into the sunlight, I could hear the distant crash of the waves, and I realized, nothing was the same. I didn't know how I made it, but somehow, my legs carried me back to the shadows outside that chapel. I stayed hidden behind the bushes, watching through the window. There they were, Celeste in her white dress, holding hands with Callum, while her parents sat in the front row, grinning like they were living some perfect fairy tale. I pressed myself against the rough bark of a palm tree, my breath shallow and my heart pounding so hard it felt like it might break through my chest. I couldn't go back in there, not yet, not with them. But I couldn't leave either. I had to know more, had to hear what they were saying, even though every word was like a fresh wound. So, I stayed hidden, watching from the shadows, like a ghost at my own funeral. I could barely make out the minister's voice, low and muffled, but then I heard Callum. His voice rang through the cracked window, loud enough for me to catch it. He doesn't know, right? His tone was nervous, like he was afraid someone might hear. Celeste squeezed his hand and whispered, "Relax. He's too dumb to notice." My stomach twisted, and I felt a wave of nausea rise in my throat. Too dumb to notice, that's what she thought of me. Then, Marjorie let out a laugh, sharp and clear, cutting through the tension. "Oh, he's too dumb to notice anything," she said, like it was the funniest thing in the world. Cliff just nodded, his pipe clenched between his teeth, a smug grin on his face. "Good thing too," he muttered, "makes this easier." I gripped the tree harder, my knuckles turning white, their words slicing into me. It wasn't just what they were doing, it was how they were laughing about it. Laughing at me. My wife, my brother, my in-laws, people I had trusted with everything, were standing there, planning something behind my back. And I was the fool who'd paid for the whole damn trip. The minister's voice was still going, his hands moving in some kind of blessing, but I couldn't focus on him. All I could hear was Celeste's voice, soft and sure, calling me dumb. All I could see was Callum's hand in hers, the way he looked at her, like she was his. My head was spinning, and for a moment, I thought I might pass out, but I didn't. I stayed on my feet, forcing myself to watch, to listen, to take in every bit of it. I don't know how long I stood there, minutes, maybe hours. Time didn't seem real anymore. The ceremony started to wind down. The minister stepped back, and Celeste and Callum turned to face Marjorie and Cliff. They were all smiling, like they'd just won something. I couldn't hear what they said next, but it didn't matter. I'd seen enough. My wife wasn't just distant, she was gone. My brother wasn't just a freeloader, he was a traitor. And her parents? They weren't family. They were conspirators. A coldness crept over me, like someone had poured ice water down my spine. I didn't cry, even though every part of me wanted to. I didn't scream, even though my throat burned with it. Instead, I just turned and walked away. My steps were slow, deliberate, taking me back toward the road where the cab had dropped me off. I didn't call another one right away. I just kept walking, the gravel crunching beneath my feet, the sound of the ocean roaring in the distance. My mind was all over the place, but one thing kept cutting through the mess. They thought I was too dumb to notice, but I wasn't. Not anymore. By the time I made it back to the resort, the sun was high and burning my neck. I stopped at a small shop by the entrance, grabbed a bottle of water, and downed it in one go, trying to calm my nerves. My hands were still shaking, but at least my head was starting to clear. I couldn't let them know I'd seen them. Not yet. If they thought I was oblivious, I'd play along. I'd smile, laugh, pretend everything was fine, and figure out what to do next. I stepped into the lobby, the cool air hitting my face, and there was Celeste, coming back from her errand. She waved at me, her purse hanging from her shoulder. That damn white dress still on her. "Hey," she said, her voice bright as ever. "You okay? You look sweaty." I forced a grin and wiped my forehead. "Yeah, just went for a walk. Hot out there." She nodded, looking relieved, and I realized she had no clue that I'd followed her. Good. Let her think I was still in the dark. I kept up the charade the rest of the day. We all went to the beach, me, Celeste, Callum, her parents. I carried the cooler, set up the chairs, even played in the waves with Callum like we were kids again. He shoved me, laughing, and I shoved him back, grinning like an idiot, even though my insides were a mess. Celeste was sitting under an umbrella, chatting with her mom, but I could feel her eyes on me every now and then. Her gaze was searching, like she was trying to figure something out. Did she suspect? I didn't care. I just kept going, kept talking, kept pretending to be fine. At dinner, I ordered a huge plate of fish and cracked some dumb jokes about the sunburn on Cliff's nose. Everyone laughed, and I laughed too, probably louder than I should have. But inside, it was like I was trapped in that chapel scene, replaying it over and over. Her hand in his. Her voice calling me dumb. Those smug looks on their faces. It all fueled me, kept my mind sharp. I wasn't going to break down. I wasn't going to give them the satisfaction that night. When I lay in bed next to Celeste, staring up at the ceiling while she slept, I could hear her soft, steady breathing, like nothing had changed, but everything had. I didn't know exactly what they were planning. Some fake wedding? A real one? A twisted game? What I did know for sure was that I couldn't trust them anymore. I loved them all, and they'd all turned on me. My wife, my brother, my in-laws, they'd made a fool of me. But I wasn't going to stay a fool. As the ceiling fan spun above me, I made a promise to myself. I was going to figure this out. I wasn't going to lash out with yelling or fighting. No. I was going to be colder, smarter. They thought I was too dumb to notice, but they were wrong. And soon enough, they'd find out just how wrong they were. The rest of the trip was like living in a haze, but I kept my head above water. After seeing Celeste and Callum in that chapel, hearing her call me dumb, watching her parents laugh about it, I knew one thing for sure, I couldn't just pretend everything was fine. But I also couldn't let them see me crack. I wasn't ready yet. So I kept playing the part, kept my face expressionless and my voice steady. We had 2 days left, and I wasn't about to let on that I knew. I smiled through every meal, snapped pictures by the pool, and even suggested we all take a boat tour the next morning. Sounds fun, right? I said at breakfast, spreading butter on my toast, acting like everything was fine, like my world wasn't falling apart around me. Celeste glanced at me, her eyes flicking to mine, and said, "Yeah, let's do it." She seemed relieved, like she thought I was still the same Grant, clueless and happy to go along with whatever. Callum smirked and said, "Sure, bro. I'm in." Marjorie clapped her hands, and Cliff gave a grunt of approval. They had no idea. No idea that I was watching every single one of them, studying every move, every word, just waiting for one of them to slip up. I'd seen what they were capable of, and now I was playing the waiting game. While they spent their time swimming or napping, I'd slip away to the hotel's business center, a tiny, dimly lit room with just a couple of computers and a printer. My fingers would shake as I logged in and started making my moves. First, I emailed my old buddy, Dave, from college. He's a private investigator now, based out of Seattle. "Hey, man," I wrote, keeping it vague, "need some help tracking something. Call me when you can." Then, I reached out to Jen, my old coworker who's great with tech stuff. "Can you look into some accounts for me?" Discreetly? I typed, giving her just enough to get started without spilling everything. I didn't know exactly what I was looking for yet. Maybe proof, maybe something I could use to gain leverage. But I knew I needed people I could trust, people outside of their little circle. Every time I sent a message, I made sure to delete the history, clear the browser, and walk out like I'd just been checking the weather. Celeste asked me once where I'd been, and I just shrugged, said I was stretching my legs. She bought it. They all did. Those last 2 days, I kept my eyes on them more than ever. Callum was practically glued to Celeste, always finding some excuse to be near her, grabbing her a drink, adjusting her chair. She didn't push him away. She just smiled and let him hover. Marjorie and Cliff were off in their own little world, heads bent together over coffee or cocktails, whispering to each other. Every now and then, they'd glance at me like I was some problem they'd already solved. I'd catch their eyes and wave, big and dumb like I was still the same guy they thought they knew. But inside, I was boiling. Every laugh, every touch between Celeste and Callum, every smug look from her parents, it all felt like fuel. I couldn't sleep much those nights. Lying next to her, I would listen to her breathing, wondering how long she'd been planning this, how long they'd all been laughing at me. But I didn't confront her. I didn't storm out or make a scene. I stayed quiet, cold, and focused. I knew the storm was coming, but they wouldn't see it until it hit. When the plane touched down back home, I was ready. We'd all flown together, packed into those tight seats, and I kept up the act. I chatted about the trip, showed Cliff how to work the in-flight screen, handed Celeste her bag, acting like nothing was wrong. But it was all just a mask. And they had no idea what was coming. When we got off the plane, they were all relaxed, laughing like nothing had changed. I smiled too, but in my head, I was already 3 steps ahead. As we grabbed our luggage from the carousel, I said, "Hey, I've got to hit the bathroom. I'll meet you guys at the car." Celeste nodded, and Callum, with that stupid grin of his, told me, "Don't get lost, bro." I didn't respond, just slung my duffel over my shoulder and walked away without looking back. I didn't go to the bathroom. Instead, I headed straight for the exit, flagged down a cab, and gave the driver an address to a cheap hotel across town. I'd already booked it while we were still in Hawaii. "Step on it," I told him, and he did. I checked in under a fake name, paid in cash, and locked myself in a room that smelled like stale cigarettes and bleach. My phone buzzed. Celeste, probably wondering where I was, but I turned it off. I didn't need to hear her voice just yet. That night, I sat on the lumpy bed, staring out the window at a flickering neon sign across the street. I'd slipped away without them knowing, but I knew they'd figure it out soon enough. They'd get home, expecting me to show up any minute, but I wouldn't be there. I could already picture them walking up to the house, our house, the one I'd put everything into, the one I'd worked so hard to make ours. They'd be tired from the flight, dragging their bags behind them, still high off their little victory in Hawaii. Celeste would unlock the door, Callum trailing behind her, and Marjorie and Cliff would be complaining about the drive. I knew exactly how it would go, but they wouldn't see me again. Not for a while. They'd walk in, flip the lights on, and that's when they'd realize, only they wouldn't. I'd made sure of that while they were lounging by the pool. I'd called in a moving company I trusted. Friends who knew the deal. They packed up everything I cared about, the documents, my computer, the safe in the closet. By the time they got to the house, it would be nothing but an empty shell, and I wanted them to feel that. That emptiness. The same hollow feeling I'd gotten when I stood in that chapel. I leaned back against the worn headboard of the hotel bed, my hands locked behind my head, and let myself picture their faces. They'd freeze in the doorway, staring at the bare walls, the furniture gone, the silence where my things used to be. Celeste would shout my name, voice sharp and full of panic. Callum would start swearing, pacing around, trying to make sense of it. Marjorie would clutch her purse, probably mumbling to herself, and Cliff would stand there, pipe in hand, trying to figure out what the hell had happened. They'd think I'd lost it, that I'd finally cracked, maybe run off in some pathetic meltdown. But they'd be wrong. I was just a few miles away, calm, collected, and ready. This wasn't the end. This was just the beginning. They'd underestimated me, thought I was too slow to notice, too weak to fight back. But I wasn't. I was going to prove them wrong. The quiet before the storm had passed. Now it was time to let it pour. I didn't sleep much that first night in the hotel. But I didn't need to. My mind was buzzing, racing with the knowledge of what I'd just set in motion. The last few days in Hawaii were all about setting things up, and now everything was falling into place. The house, the one that was supposed to be ours, was the first part of the plan. I'd called up my old buddy Mike, a guy I'd known since high school, who now ran a moving company. I told him exactly what I needed: get everything out, documents, my desk, the safe, and leave the rest behind. I kept my voice low, just enough to get the point across. He didn't ask questions, just said, "You got it, man," and handled it like he always did. By the time Celeste and the rest of them walked through the door, the place would be a shell, stripped bare. But I wasn't done yet. I left something behind, something that would make it clear I wasn't just disappearing. I wasn't running away. I was making sure they knew I was fighting back. As I sat on the squeaky hotel bed, the cheap lamp flickering beside me, I imagined it. The empty living room, the stark red paint I'd told Mike to slap across the walls in huge, bold letters. It wasn't subtle, but it didn't need to be. They'd know exactly what it was. I had something else waiting for them too, on the kitchen island. I had Mike leave a stack of papers there, divorce forms I'd downloaded, asset transfer notices I'd drafted with Jen's help. And on top of it all, a little black voice recorder, labeled, "Play Me." That recorder was the real dagger. I bought it while we were in Hawaii, just a cheap trinket from a tourist shop, and filled it with every word I'd overheard in that chapel. Let them hear it for themselves. The night before we left, I had sat in the hotel bathroom with the shower running, using the sound to hide my voice. My hands were shaking as I spoke into the mic, but my voice was steady. "You made me believe you loved me," I said, the words cold, but clear. *You made me believe I was enough, but I'm done believing. I'm taking back what's mine. It wasn't perfect, but it felt real, it was raw, it was mine. When they hit play, they'd hear everything. They'd hear their betrayal, my pain, and the vow that I wasn't going to let them walk away unscathed. I leaned back on the hotel bed, staring up at the cracked ceiling, letting myself picture how they'd react. Celeste would be the first to see the papers. I could already see her face drop as she picked up the divorce forms, my signature already there, cold and final. I imagined her calling out for Callum, her voice tight with panic. He'd come in, still full of his usual cocky swagger, but the second he saw the wall, that red paint would hit him like a punch in the gut. I could only hope it wiped that smug grin off his face. Marjorie would be the next to react, clutching her chest like she was about to faint, trying to play it up like some kind of drama queen from an old movie. And Cliff, he'd stand there, pipe dangling from his mouth, trying to figure out what the hell just happened. Then one of them would spot the recorder. Maybe Celeste would grab it, her fingers trembling as she pressed play. And when it started, they'd hear her voice first, that cruel whisper, and I could practically picture her face as it all sunk in. I could already picture it, Celeste's breath catching as she realized what was happening. Callum would curse under his breath, pacing back and forth, his confidence cracking. Marjorie and Cliff would exchange looks, and they'd know right then that their little game was over. My voice at the end, that quiet, sharp edge to it, would seal everything. It was the words I'd been holding in for far too long. They'd know I wasn't the naive fool they thought I was, the guy who couldn't see through their lies. I'd seen everything at that chapel, and I wasn't falling for it anymore. I wanted them to feel as trapped as I had that day, standing there, watching them. I had made sure of it. While we were still in Hawaii, Jen had been working behind the scenes. She'd gotten into our joint accounts, not anything illegal, but using the access I'd given her to start shifting things around. My paycheck? It was rerouted to a new account I'd set up a while ago, one Celeste knew nothing about. The emergency fund I'd kept for Marjorie and Cliff, the one they'd dipped into more times than I could count? It was gone, drained, and closed. I told Jen to make it look like a system glitch for now, and she did. They wouldn't catch on until they tried to use it. The house, still in both our names, was the next move. I'd already contacted a realtor friend to get the ball rolling on selling it, quietly, no listing yet. I wasn't just walking away from them with an empty house. I was cutting them off, piece by piece. Every dollar I'd spent, every favor I'd done, it was all coming back. They'd thought I was their personal ATM, their easy target. Well, now they'd see I was something else entirely. I sat there in that dingy hotel room, and for the first time in days, I felt a strange kind of calm wash over me. The TV was off, and the only sounds I could hear were the hum of traffic outside and the occasional creak of the walls. I didn't need to be there to know what was going on back home. I could practically feel their panic, even from miles away. They were calling me, I knew that. I kept my phone off, on purpose, and I could imagine the messages piling up, Celeste's feigned concern, Callum's endless excuses, Marjorie's whining. I didn't care enough to respond. I didn't need to. The house, the papers, the recorder, they spoke for me. I'd spent years building a life with them, believing we were a team, a family. I worked extra hours to keep up with the mortgage, fixed the leaky roof, even drove Callum to job interviews he never bothered to show up for. I gave them everything, my trust, my love, and they turned it all into a sick joke. But I wasn't laughing anymore. I was done being their punching bag. I stood up, walked over to the window, and gazed out at the dark street below. A few cars passed, their headlights slicing through the night. I thought about the wedding portrait that used to hang in our living room. Me and Celeste, smiling, so young and hopeful. Mike had taken it down, packed it along with the rest of my things, and I didn't know if I'd ever look at it again. That Grant, the one in that picture, was gone. The man standing here now, hands in his pockets, staring at nothing, was different. Harder. Smarter. They'd pushed me too far, and now, they were going to face the consequences. The empty walls and the red letters were just the beginning. I wasn't running, I wasn't hiding. I was taking back what was mine, and they were going to feel every bit of it. I woke up in that dingy hotel room, the early morning light filtering through the blinds, casting thin, sharp lines across the carpet that had seen better days. My back was sore from the worn-out mattress, but my mind was sharp, alive with the next move. By now, they'd seen it, the empty house, the red spray paint, the recorder. I could almost hear Celeste's voice crack as she played the message, feel the tense silence settle around them. But I wasn't finished. That was just the first part. Now it was time to hit them where it would really hurt. For years, I'd let them take from me money, time, trust, blind to everything they were doing. Not anymore. I grabbed my phone and turned it on just long enough to check for a message from my lawyer, Monica Traverse. She'd replied late last night. Papers ready. Say the word. I quickly typed back, go, then powered it off again. I didn't need their calls or excuses clouding my focus. This was checkmate, and I held every piece. Monica was a shark, smart, ruthless, and exactly what I needed. I'd met her years ago through a work connection, back when I thought I'd never need a lawyer. But now, she was my weapon. I'd called her from Hawaii one night while Celeste slept, and spilled everything, the chapel, the betrayal, the money I'd poured into them. I told her I was ready to move forward. My voice was quiet, barely audible over the hum of the hotel AC, but firm. I wanted them to lose, and I wanted to make sure they felt every bit of it. She didn't hesitate, just asked for the details and immediately went to work. By the time we landed, she'd already drafted the notices that would bring everything crashing down. The first one went to Celeste that morning, divorce papers served at the house by some guy in a cheap suit. I could picture it vividly, Celeste opening the door, still shaken from the night before. Her expression would fall the second she saw my name on the envelope. Inside, a demand for full asset division, no room for negotiation. She'd signed the power of attorney weeks ago, thinking it was just for a mortgage renewal, nothing more than a little paperwork, or so I'd told her. She never thought twice before signing. Now, Monica had used that signature to freeze her accounts. Every penny she thought was hers was locked away, unreachable until the court sorted it all out. Cliff and Marjorie were next. I'd set up that emergency fund for them years ago, meant to be a safety net, because they were family. But they'd treated it like their personal piggy bank, dipping into it for vacations, car repairs, whatever they wanted. I'd let it go on for too long, telling myself I was helping. But not anymore. Jen had drained the fund before we left Hawaii, and Monica followed up with a notice that cut off their access permanently. I could almost picture Cliff sitting there with his pipe, confused. Marjorie would be on the phone with the bank, frantic, only to hear, "Sorry, ma'am. It's gone." They'd turn to Celeste, expecting her to fix it, but she'd be too busy trying to claw her way out of her own mess. Then there was my brother, Theo. The golden boy turned parasite. He'd been on probation for some petty theft charge, and I'd bailed him out last year, something I never told Delilah. He wasn't even supposed to leave the state, but I went ahead and paid for his ticket to Hawaii anyway, thinking I was doing him a favor. Big mistake. I'd called his probation officer from a burner phone in the hotel room, dropping an anonymous tip. I gave them the heads up, Theo Harrington's travel records. He's been out of bounds. By the time they checked, they'd be knocking on his door with questions he wouldn't have answers to. Monica didn't stop there, though. She filed a fraud investigation against the whole group, Delilah, Theo, and their parents. The chapel stunt wasn't just a betrayal, it was a whole scheme. They'd used my money to fund the whole thing, plane tickets, the resort, even the suit Theo wore. Monica argued it was misrepresentation, maybe even embezzlement, since I'd been the one footing the bill. It was a long shot, but that didn't matter. The goal wasn't to make it stick, it was just to tie them up in legal headaches for months, drain whatever money they had left on lawyers they couldn't afford. I sat there on the edge of the hotel bed, sipping on some weak coffee from a paper cup, imagining their faces as the notices came in. Delilah would be tearing open envelopes, her hands shaking. Theo would be cursing at his phone, swearing as his probation officer called. I could picture his frustration. Meanwhile, their parents, Marjorie and Cliff, would be huddled together in their kitchen, watching their little world fall apart. I'd given them everything, my trust, my savings, my home, and they'd thrown it all back in my face. Now, it was my turn to take it back. It wasn't exactly satisfaction I felt. It wasn't fun watching the people I'd once loved crash and burn, but it felt necessary, like finally tipping the scales back to where they should have been all along. I'd spent years playing the good guy, working overtime to pay bills, fixing their problems, ignoring the signs. I thought that's what family did, you know? You sacrifice, you support. But to them? I was just a tool, someone they could drain dry. The chapel was proof of that. Celeste, standing there in that dress, her parents cheering them on. They had planned to cut me out completely, maybe live off my dime while I stayed blissfully in the dark. How long had they been working this plan? Weeks? Months? Years? Every late-night text Celeste sent. Every favor Theo asked for. Every time Marjorie patted my hand and called me, sweetheart. Was it all a lie? That thought knotted up my chest, but I shoved it down. No more pity. No more second-guessing. They'd made their move. Now it was my turn. I got up, stretched, and grabbed my duffel bag. That morning, I checked out of the hotel, paid in cash again, and slipped out the back. A rental car was waiting outside. Monica would keep up the pressure, more filings, more surprises, but for now, I needed to disappear. Let them stew. I'd already lined up a new job, something remote. Time to start over. I decided I'd disappear for a while, start fresh, far from their reach. I tossed the empty coffee cup into the trash, feeling something lift off me. Not all of it, but enough. They thought they'd won in that chapel, thought I was too blind to see what they were doing. But now, the board was flipped, and they had no moves left. Checkmate. I walked out into the bright sunlight, the keys to the rental car jingling in my hand. For the first time in days, I could breathe without that weight pressing down on me. They'd feel the squeeze soon enough, and I'd be long gone by the time it hit. I wasn't sticking around to watch them fall, but I didn't need to. I already knew what was coming. After I left that hotel, I drove out of town, my old life growing smaller and smaller in the rearview mirror. I turned off my phone for good, tossed it into a dumpster behind a gas station. I picked up a cheap prepaid one, nothing fancy. No more buzzing from Celeste's desperate calls. No more texts from Callum, trying to explain himself. No more voicemails from Marjorie, crying about how I'd ruined everything. They'd try to reach me, I was sure of it. They'd knock on the door of my old office only to find out I'd quit days ago. They'd drive past the house, hoping I'd show up, but it'd stay empty. The for sale sign would be going up soon enough. I'd cut every tie, I was a ghost to them now. Monica was taking care of the rest. Legal notices, account freezes, the fraud case, she'd keep the pressure on. I didn't need to see their faces to know they were crumbling. I could feel it, and that was all I needed. The first few days, I kept moving, staying in cheap motels, paying with cash, keeping a low profile. I'd lie on beds that felt like they were made of concrete, staring up at ceilings stained by water, imagining what was happening back there. Celeste would have tried calling first, her voice trembling as she left messages I would never listen to. "Grant, where are you? We need to talk," she'd say, thinking I'd eventually come around, that she could talk her way out of it, like she always did. When I didn't respond, she'd turn to Callum, snapping at him for messing up their perfect little scheme. He'd play it off at first, cocky as ever, until his probation officer showed up. I could see him, in cuffs, cursing as they hauled him in for violating the terms, unauthorized travel, fake IDs, all the things I tipped them off about. He'd blame me, of course. But he wouldn't have any proof, just his own mess to deal with. Marjorie and Cliff would be next, pacing their living room, yelling at each other. When the bank told them their fund was gone, they'd be left scrambling. How could he do this? Marjorie would wail, while Cliff sat there, still as stone, realizing they had pushed me too far. They thought I was their safety net, but now they were falling, and there was nothing to catch them. I heard bits and pieces through Dave, a private investigator I knew. He'd been keeping tabs from a distance, digging around, and he'd call my burner phone with updates. "They're a mess, man," he said a week later, his voice crackling over the line. Celeste tried to hire a lawyer, but her accounts were frozen. She had nothing to pay with. Word about the chapel incident got out too. Someone leaked the audio, and honestly, I didn't ask who did it. I hadn't told anyone to do it, but I wasn't surprised either. Maybe Jen had passed it along, or maybe Monica slipped it to the right people. Either way, Celeste's reputation was ruined. She'd been climbing the ranks as a freelance graphic designer, working for big-name clients. Now, though, Dave told me her name was Mud. People weren't touching her anymore. After hearing her laugh about me in that recording, I could almost picture her now, hunched over her laptop, hitting refresh over and over, waiting for job offers that would never come. Her perfect life, crumbling. The threads were coming apart one by one. Cliff and Marjorie weren't doing any better. Dave said their old social circle had turned their backs on them. Those fancy dinner parties they'd always been invited to? Gone. Once the whispers started, they were finished. Now, they were holed up in some crumbling condo in Detroit, fighting over who gets the decent couch. I almost laughed at the thought. Marjorie, clutching her pearls, and Cliff, grumbling about his tobacco pipe. They were stuck in a place they never would have set foot in before. Their retirement, supposed to be cushy, funded by me, was gone, and I'd pulled the rug out from under them. They'd probably sue each other before they'd ever think about suing me. Monica had made sure everything was covered. As for Callum, he was back in court, facing jail time. Dave told me he tried calling from a holding cell, begging for help, but by then, my number was disconnected. I'd bailed him out too many times before, but not this time. He dug his own hole, and I wasn't about to climb back in with him. I found a small town a few states over, somewhere with wide streets and quiet nights. A place that didn't need much from me. A cheap apartment and a new job were enough. I'd lined up some remote online teaching, coding basics. I kept a low profile, didn't mention my past. The money from the house sale was going to come through soon. Monica was handling the details, splitting it clean down the middle, but Celeste wouldn't see much after the legal fees and debts were paid. The cash didn't matter to me though. I'd already taken what was most important, my freedom, my peace. Every night, I'd sit on the tiny balcony of my new place, a beer in hand, listening to the crickets instead of their voices. No more late-night whispers through thin walls. No more forced smiles over dinners I didn't want to be at. Their so-called golden family, the one they'd built, the one I'd funded, was now nothing more than a tarnished mess. They'd thought they could erase me from the story, but I'd burned the book instead. Sometimes, I'd wonder how they were holding up, Celeste, alone in that condo, staring at a phone that wouldn't ring. Callum, stuck in a cell, cursing my name. Marjorie and Cliff, fighting over whatever scraps were left, their pride in tatters. But I didn't feel sorry for them. Not really. They made their choice at every step. The chapel wasn't some accident, it was their statement. They wanted me gone. They wanted a life without me, and now they had it, though not in the way they'd envisioned. I'd given them everything once, my love, my trust, my savings, and they tossed it all aside. So, I took it back piece by piece, until they had nothing left to hold on to. The fall was theirs, and I was done trying to catch them. I built something new here. It's small, but it's mine. For the first time in a long while, I feel steady, like the ground beneath me isn't about to crumble away. A year later, I'm sitting on the back porch of my little place in Denver, the air cool and crisp as the sun dips behind the mountains. It's a far cry from the chaos of that old life. The house I shared with Celeste, the constant noise of her parents, Callum's mess scattered across my living room, it's all behind me now. Here, it's quiet. Just the rustling of leaves and the occasional bark of a neighbor's dog. I've built something new, something simple, and it fits me better than that life ever did. I teach coding at a community college now, working with teens who've had it rough, dropouts, kids from broken homes, the kind I could have easily been if I hadn't fought my way out. They're rough around the edges, but they listen when I talk. I see myself in their hungry eyes. On weekends, I hike the trails around the city, my boots crunching on dirt paths, the weight of the past lifting off my shoulders with every step. I'm not rich, not flashy, but I'm steady, and that's more than I could say a year ago. The house isn't much, a small one-bedroom with a sagging couch and a kitchen that barely fits me, but it's mine. No one stops by uninvited. No one talks about me behind my back. I've got a real backyard, the kind with patchy grass, where I sit with a cup of coffee most mornings, watching the sky shift. It's funny how little I need these days. Back then, I thought I had to keep up with everything, pay for trips, solve everyone's problems, always be the guy who said yes. Now, I've got a prepaid phone with maybe 10 contacts, an old truck that gets me where I need to go, and a job that covers the bills. I don't miss the big house or the savings I burned through. Those things weren't treasures. They were chains, tying me to people who didn't care. Here, I'm free, and that feels worth more than anything money could buy. Sometimes, I grab coffee with Leah, another teacher at the college. She's got dark hair and a laugh that cuts through the quiet, sharp and real in a way Celeste's never was. We met during orientation. She teaches math and runs a tutoring program for the same kids I work with. The first time we talked, I was nervous, stumbling over my words as I sipped a lukewarm latte, but she didn't mind. She's easy to be around, no games, no hidden agendas. We'll sit in this little shop downtown, trading stories about our students or the dumb stuff we did in our 20s. She knows I was married once. She doesn't know the whole story, just that it ended badly and I don't like talking about it. "You're better off," she said once, her eyes soft, but understanding. "Sure," I replied, and I nodded because she was right. There's no pressure with her, no rush. We're just two people who get along, and that's enough for now. Maybe something will come of it, maybe it won't. I'm not chasing anything anymore. There's one thing from that old life I keep tucked away in a drawer by my bed, my wedding ring. It's just a simple silver band, scratched up from years of wear. I don't look at it much, but it's there. A reminder, not of Celeste or the love I thought we had, but of the moment when I found myself. I remember slipping it off that night at the hotel. My hands were steady as I dropped it into my bag. It wasn't about her anymore. It was about me, about finally waking up from the lie I'd been living. I spent so long believing family was blood, that loyalty came with a ring or a last name. They showed me otherwise. Celeste in that white dress, Callum by her side, her parents cheering. It wasn't just betrayal, it was a lesson. Family isn't about who you're born into or who you marry. It's about trust, honesty, the people who never stab you in the back while you're paying for their plane tickets. I didn't have that then, but I'm finding it now, piece by piece. The kids I teach are part of this new chapter. There's one, Marcus, 16, full of attitude and quick with his hands. He reminds me of Callum back before things went off the rails. He showed up late to my first class, slouching in the back like he couldn't care less. But then he stayed after, asking questions about loops and coding. Now, he's in class every day, building little programs, talking about tech school. I see that spark in him, the same one I had when I was starting out. I push him because I know what it feels like to need someone to believe in you. The other teachers, like old Mr. Foster with his corny jokes, they're becoming my people too. After work, we'll grab beers, sometimes at a dive bar with sticky tables, and I find myself laughing harder than I have in years. It's small, messy, and real. Nothing like the polished facade I used to live behind. I don't need a huge group anymore, just a few good people, that's enough. I don't really know what's going on with them anymore. Celeste, Callum, her parents, they've all faded out. Dave stopped filling me in months ago, and I didn't ask. The last I heard, they were scrambling, all broken. But I didn't check in. They're gone from my life now. Ghosts. I don't need them haunting me. If I had to guess, Celeste's still fighting to get her career back on track. Callum's in and out of trouble. Marjorie and Cliff are slipping into obscurity. None of that matters anymore. I've got my porch, my hikes, my students at the college. I've got Lee's laugh, Marcus's quiet determination. And that's more than enough. Thanks. When he nails a project, I see it, *me*, the version of myself I didn't know was possible. Stronger, sharper, free. If you were to ask me what family means now, I'd tell you it's not about blood, rings, or shared roofs. It's about trust, honesty. It's about choosing the people who won't wear a white dress and stab you in the back when you're not looking. And here, in this small life I've built for myself, I've finally found it.